The prophecy of Isaiah. We've now reached presentation 30. A comparison between Babylon and Israel, or specifically the people of Judah. Let's just reflect back for a moment or two on where we've been. Isaiah has painted a contrast between the tribal gods of the people groups all around, including the Babylonian Empire. Their tribal gods are just human creations. They've no interest in human welfare, and they exist only for their own benefit. They don't create anything. They can't create anything. They can't make themselves known. They're human inventions. And they have no ability to interpret events or predict the future. And Isaiah has shown that Yahweh, the God of the people of Judah, is totally different. He is not a tribal God. He is not a human creation. He is the creator who pre-existed before everything. Yahweh, the name they used, the self-existent one, but also the God of a relationship who makes himself known. He's described as having created, and the word means created from nothing, but also he forms. He forms the world. He forms humans. He develops and molds us. And humans were created for a purpose. And Isaiah has shown that the events and the history of mankind move with a purpose, the purpose that God has planned. And God has revealed himself to his people. God is truth. Everything that is correct and true is vested in him, in his nature, and in what he has done. And he always does what is right. The contrast is painted. But the contrast goes on. And Isaiah now paints a contrast between the empire of Babylon and the tiny nation of Judah. It was massive, ruled most of the Middle East, had a powerful army, invincible leaders, or so they seemed, and it had wealth and power. And now look at the people of God by contrast. Their land had been decimated. Jerusalem, their capital, had been sacked, the great fortress city. The temple had been demolished, and many had been taken into exile into Babylon. The Babylonian Empire, founded in 1792 BC under the great Hammurabi, kind of got absorbed into the empires of Assyria, but it became powerful from 626 and ruled much of the Middle East. By contrast, Judah promised a land and a people given to Abraham. The people entered the land under Joshua, a tiny country with little power, little wealth. Look at the comparison. Who do you think would make the greater world impact? Isaiah's great in his contrasts. What happened to Babylon? Overrun. Lost its power and wealth. Disappeared from history. And its brutal policies were reversed under the Medo-Persian Empire. By contrast, Judah was released from exile, given fresh resources to start again. The kingdom of Judah was rebuilt, including Jerusalem, and Jesus was born into that kingdom. And no human that has ever lived has made a greater impact on mankind than the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the theme of chapter 47, and that's the theme of chapter 48. And we'll look at these two chapters now and the comparison that Isaiah has painted for us. Chapter 47. Go down, sit in the dust, virgin daughter Babylon. Sit in the ground without a throne, queen city of the Babylonians. No more will you be called tender or delicate. Take millstones and grind flour. Take off your veil, lift up your skirts, bare your legs, wade through the streams. Your nakedness will be exposed, your shame uncovered. I will take vengeance, I will spare no one. Our Redeemer, the Lord Almighty, Yahweh, is his name, is the Holy One of Israel. God's in control, not Babylon. Sit in silence, go into darkness, queen city of the Babylonians. No more will you be called queen of kingdoms. I was angry with my people and desecrated my inheritance. I gave them into your hand and you showed them no mercy. Even on the aged you laid a very heavy yoke. You said, I am forever the eternal queen. But you did not consider these things or reflect on what might happen. Now then listen, you lover of pleasure, lounging in your security and saying to yourself, I am he and there is none besides me. Isaiah is using a metaphor here, the metaphor of a beautiful but arrogant woman, now reduced to slavery. Grinding corn, working irrigation ditches. The picture is actually of the land that Babylon ruled. And this was regarded as the most menial of work that slaves carried out. And the idea of nakedness is just a metaphor for defenselessness. The great empire had collapsed. The word vengeance, we've got to watch that. The word has changed its meaning. And in the original, it's got very strongly got the meaning of God acting to put things right. Difficult to translate. But God is not in the business of being vindictive. But God comes and acts to put things right, to make things better. Judah had been overrun, but Babylon had only been allowed to do it by God. Judah had rebelled against God. Judah had removed itself from the protection of God. But at the same time, the society of Judah had become so utterly corrupted and weak that it couldn't stand against any empire round about. Two ways of looking at the same thing. But Babylon thought it had done it. Where did Babylon go wrong? History shows it was arrogant, brutal and pleasure-seeking, and Isaiah has painted that picture here. They exalted themselves, but they made others suffer. They delighted in making others suffer. But if you look at it in the context of the history of that time, it's not that much different from other empires of that age. So where had they gone wrong? Why did they collapse in this way? Because they assumed invincibility. They were the top dogs, they could do what they wanted, they had immortality, they thought they had even got divinity. They were bigger than God. And because they'd conquered Judah, they saw themselves as superior to the God of Judah. And as I look out in the world today, I see that attitude here today. As the people of God decline in the West, and the political powers and the humanistic influences grow, they see themselves as superior, and our God and our religion are irrelevant. But you also see it most vividly in the Islamic world, which sees itself as superior to the people of God. But look at the last little bit in both columns, highlighting it here. Let's just fade out the rest and focus on that bit. The picture here is of Yahweh, the God of the people of Judah. And Babylon being addressed here, you lover of pleasure, lounging in your security, thinking I am. That's kind of claiming to be divine. The word means the self-existent one. He was the creator. He was in control of events in history. And Babylon could only do what God permitted. And God was righteous in everything. He is right and he does what is right. Babylon thought she was the mistress of her own destiny. She was in total control of everything. She was like a god. She could conquer and destroy at will, and she was proud in her strength and abilities, and her strength and abilities were very considerable. But behind the scenes, there was a huge industry of the occult. We'll look at that in a moment or two. And they thought they were superior to the God of Judah. And the people of Judah started to believe it. They had lost everything when they were in exile. That quotation by the great theologian John Ostwald. God is supreme, and no nation, however proud and glorious, can stand against him. No ruler, no emperor, no government, however proud and glorious, can stand against him. God is the Lord of events and history. That's what Isaiah was stressing here. But let's move on. Both of these will overtake you in a moment, on a single day, loss of children and widowhood. They will come upon you in full measure. In spite of your many sorceries and all your potent spells, you have trusted in your wickedness and have said, "No one sees me." Your wisdom and knowledge mislead you when you say to yourself, "I am, and there is none besides me," claiming to be God. Disaster will come upon you, and you will not know how to conjure it away. A calamity will fall upon you that you cannot ward off with a ransom. A catastrophe you cannot foresee will suddenly come upon you. Keep on then with your magic spells, and with your many sorceries which you have laboured at since childhood. Perhaps you will succeed because you will cause terror. All the counsel you have received has only worn you out. Let your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month. Let them save you from what is coming upon you. Surely they are like stubble. The fire will burn them up. They cannot even save themselves from the power of the flame. All of them go on in their errors. There is not one that can save you. It's a vivid picture of what the Babylon Empire became, and it led to its total downfall. They were deeply interested in astrology. Sadly, much of the astrology today goes back to the systems they invented and developed. They are logical nonsense. But you see them in our society today, and they've influenced us subtly in the way we think and in our culture. We think we can manipulate the world. Rituals and connections between things, particularly connections between stars and things up in the sky. The problem with this is it removes accountability for actions. Everything is predetermined by the world itself, predetermined by the stars. So ethics goes out the window. And it had done so for Babylon, and it is doing so in the West today. Isaiah delivers this sarcastic challenge. They were depending on their decision-taking. They would analyze the creations, the star movements, the astrologers. They thought that would guide them correctly. How gullible and foolish we human beings can become. That's what Isaiah is saying. And there's all sorts of ritual and magic and astrology has infiltrated our society, even getting into the edges of our church life. Doesn't work. You see, it starts with human arrogance. We think we can, we think we know, we think we are clever. We can solve the problems. And as I say that, you can almost hear the echo of some political figures in the world today. But you see, that kind of approach generates human gods. So when we come humbly and say, we're in a mess, we don't know what to do, guide us, Lord, that's a different approach. But these human gods, the gods of power, materialism, weapons, planning, committee meetings, they just reflect ourselves. And we get a superiority complex in the way we think. I have watched over the years politicians coming into leadership with great commitment and desire to bring benefit to the people who voted them in, to see it corrupted by the system, till they think they know, and they think they have the answers. But that's what it leads to. You can see it vividly with the story of the Babylonian Empire, but you can see it in any empire, in any culture, and you can see it today. You can see it vividly in our Western democracies. People get power by promising things. They think they know, they can solve the problems, they can move things forward, very often with a great desire and a commitment to bring benefit, genuinely, and a commitment to help people and to serve a nation. But human arrogance creeps in. And the rich get richer, and those at the bottom of the heap suffer. But it's just there in the communist or totalitarian states in the world today, where a ruler can keep getting elected by eliminating the opposition, either by assassination or imprisoning them. A superiority complex. I've got the answers, but others get abused. You can see it vividly in the Islamic states. We are right, we know, and it's taught specifically in the Quran that God only loves Muslims. Therefore we're superior. You end up with others, minorities in Islamic states. They get abused. And the documentation of this is massive throughout the world, although sadly ignored largely by our media. But let's bring it closer to home. The social groupings, the workplace, the leisure activities. We can even see it in our church denominations. We're right. They're not right down the road. We've got it right. A superiority complex. And abuse of others. You can see it within families. Tragically. And so it goes on. Isaiah is very perceptive. He sees the reality of what we human beings do. He's pictured it in the context of the Babylonian Empire, but it's true all over the place. Yes, the Babylonian Empire had lots of gods, but it had its more subtle gods of power, brutality, superiority. But overall, because of its occultic background, it failed to distinguish God from his creation. It is farcical to think that movements of heavenly objects determine our future. They created gods in their own image that reflected themselves on what they, the rulers, wanted. And religion and politics got intertwined completely. So they employed the occult to predict, to manipulate, and to justify that which was downright wrong. These are all fundamental errors. And that's what it led to. History shows it's true. Isaiah had it right. And it will be true of any empire that goes this way. It'll be true of any culture that goes this way. It'll be true of any human enterprise that goes this way. It'll be true of any church or religious group that goes this way. Now let's move on into chapter 48, the other side of the contrast. Listen to this, you descendants of Jacob, you who are called by the name of Israel and come from the line of Judah, you who take oaths in the name of the Lord and invoke the God of Israel, but not in truth or righteousness. You who call yourselves citizens of the holy city and claim to rely on the God of Israel, the Lord Almighty is his name. I foretold the former things long ago. My mouth announced them and I made them known. Then suddenly I acted and they came to pass. For I knew how stubborn you were. Your neck muscles were iron, your forehead was bronze. Therefore I told you these things long ago. Before they happened I announced them to you, so that you could not say, my image brought them about, my wooden image and metal God ordained them. You have heard these things, look at them all. Will you not admit them? God is addressing the people of Judah. It's interesting in this section, this chapter, that word is used 10 times, and there are 1 or 2 other words that have a similar meaning that are also used. Wake up, says Isaiah. Listen to what God has done. Listen, look at the evidence. You see, they claimed to be the people of God, but their religion was in name only. They claimed to rely on the God of Israel, but they weren't doing that. They had indulged in persistent rebellion. They wanted to run their own lives, their own nation, their own culture, their own way. They thought they knew better than God. Oh, the people of God, how often we have fallen into that tragic trap. And we're still doing it in our churches today. We plan. We think we have answers. But God says, I know how stubborn you are. Your neck muscles are iron, your forehead's bronze. You won't bow. You won't listen. Listen is the command. Look at the evidence. God has warned them what would happen. God has shown them the events before they happen. They weren't brought around by occultic influences as with the Babylonians. Look at the evidence. You've heard these things. Look at them all. Look what I said. Look what I warned you. Face up to the evidence. Oh, how in religion today we would just look at the evidence. Most religions would collapse like a pack of cards because they're not based on evidence. They're based on assertion, which allows powerful people to get into powerful positions, to throw their weight around amongst their followers. But even within Christianity, we've gone that way. And God is saying through Isaiah to the people of God today, look at the evidence. Oh, we've got to break away from our persistent rebellion and our religion in name only. The real challenge to the people of God, the people of Judah then, is still a challenge today. From now on I will tell you of new things, of hidden things unknown to you. They are created now and not long ago. You have not heard of them before today, so you cannot say, yes, I knew of them. You have neither heard nor understood from of old. Your ears have not been open. Well do I know how treacherous you are. You are called a rebel from birth. For my own name's sake I delay my wrath. For the sake of my praise I hold it back from you, so as not to destroy you completely. See, I have refined you, though not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake I do this. How can I let myself be defamed? I will not yield my glory to another. So often misunderstood. Predictive prophecy is given for a reason. The Bible is full of it. So many books of prophets, but so many references to prophets and what they said in the historical books. Prophecy is given to reassure us that God is in control. Through a human being, God reveals the meaning of a situation, what is happening under the radar, and what will be the consequences, where it will lead, what will happen. But it's to lead us forward to trust God, that we can trust God, and we should trust God. He is in control. We've got to take this seriously and get back to understand the great prophetic insights and not rip them out of context and make up the kind of fairy tales that we often see in our Christian communities today. Fairy tales that simply cannot be justified by looking at the text and what God is saying. That was the people of Judah. And Isaiah had been warned away back in chapter 6. You'll go on talking to these people. They will not listen. They will not act. But keep on saying it, keep on saying it, keep on saying it, make it clear. And Isaiah did that. And the book we've got is the record of what he did. Rebels throughout. Now God might well have just wiped out the nation. They had failed him so completely. But in fact God held back anything. Gave them chance after chance after chance. They were nearly overrun and wiped out by the Assyrians. But the intervention of good King Hezekiah just saved the day. But it postponed the inevitable because the people did not listen. His successor as king turned the clock backwards and went back to total rebellion. God is patient. But let me say very gently, the patience of God with the church in the West is running out. The messages are writ large. If we would even look at the statistics of what's happening. We have marginalized God, locked him up in our churches and ritualized him out of existence. We have removed God from the realities and the practicalities of daily life. We have rebelled persistently. And we're declining, we're being marginalized, our influences are going, and laws are being passed that contradict the ways of God. God's patience is running out. We must put our house in order. And that's how it will happen. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. In the original text, it actually is, I have chosen you in the furnace of affliction. God tests us through what we're going to go through in the West, so that he can choose us for the task of making him known. The hope and expectation is that we will come through these tough times and we'll learn a little bit, but we learn it the hard way because we persistently rebel. Now God is speaking to the nation of Judah. He's speaking to the people of God. He's speaking to the people of God today. God has not wiped out the church completely in the West, because he has chosen us in the furnace of affliction. That's what lies ahead unless we put our rebellion and sort it out. Perhaps there's also a message here at the individual level when we're going through terribly hard times. There's a process of refining and chosenness. God does not send it. God does not use the disasters of life to teach us a lesson. We get into these things by the way we've gone in our lives, in our cultures, and those around us. And some things we suffer through no fault of our own, but brought on by others. But ponder this. God chooses in the furnace of affliction. And the whole thing is bound up with that. Ripped out of context, that can be made to mean almost anything. But the fact is that God's reputation is bound up with his people. What kind of reputation does God have today when society looks at the behavior of the church, the people of God today? Or be precise, the behavior of a tiny minority of leaders who've abused their position and damaged others, and then the church that's tried to hide it. God has to refine us. God has to choose us in the furnace of affliction. His reputation is on the line. We destroy ourselves, but we drag God's name through the mud. And others who could find their reality of life and their fulfillment in life in God don't look at the God of the church or the God of the people of God. There is a deep thought there we've got to face up to. Listen to me, Jacob, Israel, whom I have called. I am he. I am the first, I am the last. My own hand laid the foundations of the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. When I summon them, they will all stand together. Come together, all of you, and listen. Which of the idols has foretold these things? The Lord's chosen ally will carry out his purpose against Babylon. His arm will be against the Babylonians. Even I have spoken. Yes, I have called him. I will bring him, and he will succeed in his mission. Come near me and listen to this. From the first announcement, I have not spoken in secret. At the time it happens, I am there. And now the sovereign Lord has sent me, endowed with his Spirit. A reminder to the people of God of who God is. God had revealed to Isaiah that if they persisted with their behavior and went on this way, the exile was inevitable, but it wouldn't last forever. Isaiah's successor Jeremiah showed that it would be 70 years before the temple was rebuilt. And they would be released by a pagan ruler, the ruler of the Medo-Persian Empire, who followed very different policies from those of the Babylonians. This is what the Lord says. Your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I am the Lord your God, who teaches you what is best for you, who directs you in the way you should go. If only you had paid attention to my commands, your peace would have been like a river, your well-being like the waves of the sea. Your descendants would have been like the sand, your children like its numberless grains. Their name would never be blotted out nor destroyed from before me. Leave Babylon, flee from the Babylonians. Announce this with shouts of joy and proclaim it. Send it to the ends of the earth. Say, the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. They did not thirst when he led them through the deserts. He made waters flow for them from the rock. He split the rock and water gushed out. There is no peace, says the Lord, for the wicked. What might have been if only you had listened? Oh, what a message for us today. You see, God does give us directions. Not a rule book. He gives it so that our lives might be enhanced and fulfilled and enriched in every way. He knows the best way for living, and he provides us security and inner peace, if only we had listened. He increases the numbers of his people. Why are the people of God, the church in the West, declining so rapidly? Because we have not listened, and we are not listening yet. But remember that. We, the people of God in the West today, the reputation of God, the reputation of Jesus, are linked to what we do and what we say. God speaks to others through how we are. But God shows Isaiah that there would be a release. God would intervene. The emperor would make a declaration and the people would be free to return. But they had to choose to go back. So it says, leave Babylon, flee. The choice was open to them, but God would make it possible. Go back, re-establish the nation, rebuild the society, and then make God known to the people groups round about. Because of what God had done for us. Announce this with shouts of joy and proclaim it. And God would be there for them. What a magnificent picture, but there's a message there for the people of God in the West. What Isaiah foresaw? He recognized that because of the endless rebellion, a rebellion that got worse, exile was inevitable. But they would be restored if they were willing to come back. They would not be absorbed into the cultures around. History shows it that every other people group was just absorbed, disappeared. Uniquely and alone, the people of Judah were restored. They did come back. The temple worship was restored and God was made center of the nation. And the instructions of God, known as the Torah, the directions of God that we find in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that was re-established. And there's the stories of Ezra, the scribe, reading out the law. Remember, most people couldn't read or write in those days. He read it to the people in Jerusalem and reminded them of the directions that God had given. Sadly, they went on making mistakes. But out of that people group, there were many godly people. And God in due time was able to choose a couple to whom he could entrust himself in the life of Jesus. And the process of transforming mankind moved to a different level. It lost its geographical link. It lost its nationalistic link. And it crossed all the cultures and divides. And Jesus has drawn people to himself down through the centuries. And in today, the numbers who are coming to Jesus and the growth of the people of God is incredible. Yes, we're declining in the West, but everywhere else there is growth. Massive growth. Again, conveniently ignored in the media. Numerically, it's a far greater growth than Islam, and it's a genuine growth. It's not just with bigger families. And that all came out of what Isaiah foresaw. He saw the coming of the new king, the sent one of God, the servant king, who would take this forward. But God is not a manipulator. He doesn't try to dominate and push us around. He doesn't make demands on us that are unreasonable. God is on our side. He wants the best for us. He's there to speak to us and guide us. He doesn't work by a rule book. He doesn't work by pressures or threats. He does not manipulate. He opens the door to new possibilities. And for the people of Judah stuck in the land of Babylon in exile, the door was opened to go back, to make a fresh start, to learn from the dreadful mistakes, and lay the foundations where Jesus could come and the kingdom of God could be growing rapidly. But it's our choice. Your choice. The choice of the churches of the West. And we need to learn our lessons before the affliction that's coming will get too great. To do it God's way, to listen to him, and to follow him. That is the message of the prophecy of Isaiah.